I took Dónal out of hospital, drove him to where we shot, and then put him in the car and brought him back to hospital after that. And I honestly didn't know, will he be here? Will he be here when the film comes out? Thank God he is, and it's fine. But I didn't know that then.
Hi everybody. That voice you just heard was Nuala O'Connor, the Emmy Award-winning documentarian. And I'm Martin Nutty.
And I'm John Lee. Welcome to our latest conversation for the Global Irish Nation. And we're headed next to the Solas Nua Capital Irish Film Festival in the D.C. metro area, February 26th through March 1st, where we will be the podcasters in residence. And we'll be seeing Nuala's film again, along with over 40 other great examples of Irish film. Join us there.
We're delighted to have the opportunity to speak to Nuala about her film, In Time. And this film tells the story of the life of Dónal Lunny, who might best be classified in the world of traditional Irish music as a hidden genius. For over 50 years, Dónal has played with many of Ireland's best-known traditional and some non-traditional bands, which include Planxty, the Bothy Band, Moving Hearts, and now Atlantic Arc. Nuala has made a comprehensive film about the life of Dónal Lunny. It gives a great insight into what makes a musical genius tick.
And the music, of course, a key selling point of this film. But let's also just get you ready for a visual treat, a kind of tone poem in black and white that'll take you into the moods of the music and the many moods of Dónal Lunny, the ups and downs, the triumphs and tragedies of a remarkable Irish life.
And so now, here's Nuala. Nuala O'Connor, welcome to the Irish Stew podcast.
Thank you very much. I'm very much glad to be part of an Irish Stew.
I'm glad you can join us. So I detect that your accent is Dublin, like myself, but you're a long-time resident in Kerry. Talk to us about county identification. Where do you belong in this Irish ferment?
Oh, where does anybody belong? I grew up in Dublin, that's correct. But the other half of my family, my mother was from Mayo, and my paternal grandparents were from Kerry, in fact. Not from this part of Kerry, but from Kerry. So I identify with Kerry and Mayo, which is a bit ambivalent, given that they're sporting rivals often. But my childhood and schooling and all of that was in Dublin. And then once I got to university, I became part of an Irish language club and a music society in college. And we used to come down here a lot. So this part of West Kerry has been a place that I've come to since I was about 16 and got to know it very well before we moved here. And then my husband, Philip King, who's my partner in the production company, and he's from Cork and went to university there. So there was a lot of traffic between the university there and the Gaeltacht here, based around Irish language and music. And Sean Riada, of course, who spent a lot of time here and was from Cork. So then when we got together, we both had this place in common. Although we were both working in Dublin, I was a radio producer for RTE Radio, and Philip was on air at the time and also a working musician. We set up an independent production company called Hummingbird, and our interests converged around a series that we did for the BBC called Bringing It All Back Home, which looked at the journey of Irish music out of Ireland, mainly but not exclusively to America, but also to England. That was a fantastic immersion into the world of independent production, because we travelled so much. We went to New York and Nashville, and we had sessions in Nashville with Irish and American musicians. Notably, one that stands out forever in my memory is Ricky Skaggs and Paddy Glacken and Dónal Lunny, who was a long-time friend of ours, and he was the music director on that series. So that was 1990. That's how far back it goes. In the meantime, we were coming here, we had a family, and then the Irish language television station, then called Telefís na Gaeltacht, then now called TG Cahir, that set up in Connemara, and they knew our backgrounds in broadcasting and that we came here all the time and had filmed here and had friends here, and wondered if we'd actually move here so that there could be a company with Irish language credentials, if you like, based in an area of the country in Uganda that they didn't have any production company in. And we were thinking of something like that anyway. Our children were small, and we decided if we're ever going to do that, we'd do it now. And that's the story. We just arrived here in 1997.
We're focusing today on your film that will be at the Solas Nua Capital Irish Film Festival in time. And you already mentioned Dónal Lunny. Before I became heavily involved in all things Irish, which I am these days, Planxty and Dónal Lunny was on my radar from way, way back. I came at it from listening to jazz, and I found my way into that sort of improvisation that really appealed to me in Irish music. But speaking of jazz, speaking of music, speaking of the title of the film, In Time, that resonates for me on several levels. Could you talk about that title and what are some of the layers of meaning in the title of the film?
You know, sometimes things come to you for no reason, and then they seem to be very reasonable after they've arrived. So it's a very layered title, and you're the first person to ask me about it. So there's the idea of time signature in music, and working backwards, Dónal is associated with time signatures in a way that no other Irish musician was ever involved in before. So that he, if you like, really moved the musical pieces around the board in terms of the time signatures of Irish music, but in a way that never changed it so that it became unrecognisable. And this is a hallmark of Dónal, that he's a really radical innovator in one way, and yet in another way, he never changes the architecture of the music fundamentally at all. And I think that anybody who plays music will realise that is quite an achievement. And people who don't will just say, oh, that's very nice, it sounds great. But they don't really understand, I think, how remarkable it is. So he's one of those remarkable kind of people. Dónal also has been at the forefront of Irish music for so long, you know, literally in time. And that music is all about time. That's what it is. And it cannot exist outside of time in so many different ways. And so that you have a memory of Planxty, I have a memory of Planxty because of our age and because they were so outstanding when we were young. So in our time, in my time, they were the soundtrack to our lives in so many ways that goes much deeper than just the played music. So that was another reason. And I think in the back of my head, I felt that Dónal had been a bit overlooked because he is, as one friend of his has said to me, modest beyond what's reasonable. He has never, ever sought the limelight. And his whole thing is he's regarded as like the great accompanist in Irish traditional music, amongst other things. And so he's to the side, very important and to the side. So I thought in time that will be different, that in time he will be recognised as the icon that he is.
I'll add one more that I think we'll get to later in the conversation. There's a just-in-time aspect to this film that comes out very poignantly towards the end. But I'm jumping way ahead.
Yeah, you're so right. Yeah, that, of course, I wasn't aware of. It came off of a title.
One of the challenges in making a work that is, let's say, a lot of it visual, you're trying to get under the skin to some degree of a musician and understand their work. And it struck me watching the film that you were trying to build up a deeper picture of Dónal that may not be obvious to many people. The opening sequence, he's imitating bird whistle. And then you go on to expose his love of nature. And there's a very strong set of imagery emphasizing nature throughout the film, and yet we're talking about a musician all the time. So talk about building out multiple dimensions about Dónal and how that was important to your overall goal in the film.
Definitely the birds and the nature are absolutely intertwined at every level. And I think without laying it on with a trowel or anything. Dónal comes from a family who, although they come from an Irish language background, his mother was a first language Irish speaker and his grandparents had no English. And so he spent a lot of his time in an area where Irish was spoken, only Irish was spoken. However, they didn't play music. And to the best of my knowledge, there was no singing, like formal singing or even session singing in the family, even though his mother knew all of the kind of songs that any mother would know, the equivalent of Hush-a-Bye Baby and those kind of songs that you'd sing to children. So she knew the songs, but she wasn't regarded in her own community as a standout singer or anything like that. So that I think the first sounds that Dónal, I mean, he is a pair of ears above all. Everything he receives, I think he receives visually and audibly, if you like, it through his ears. And so I think that his childhood he was just receiving sound all the time. So his mother's family lived, as I say, up in Donegal in Belfast up there, but where he lived on the east coast of Ireland in a very urban setting, a town called Newbridge, and not too far from Dublin, about 30 miles from Dublin, on a train line to Dublin with industry and all the usual things. His father was an engineer, but it's surrounded by a huge, geographically very interesting part of Ireland called the Bog of Allen, which is the middle of Ireland, stretches right down to the middle of Ireland. And so it was wildlife like paradise. And he was a solitary kind of child that was listening all the time. So that was his bird sanctuary, his own personal bird sanctuary. And he also has, actually, this is another thing about the title, he has no sense of time whatsoever. It could be 3 o'clock in the morning, it could be 10 o'clock, neither makes any difference. So he was the child who disappeared, and his mother and father had 9 children. So where any of them were at any one particular time was difficult to keep track of. So Dónal used to just disappear, as he says in the film. He really did just, I think, is it called lighting out for the territory, that line from Huckleberry Finn. I mean, he just lit out for the Curragh of Kildare, the Bog of Allen, and spent a lot of time out there. And I think all of that was stockpiled in his head. The other side of it was his father was very musical, Frank. He did sing. I had a recording of him singing, in fact, a ballad. But he was quite interested in classical music. And Dónal's aunt, that's the Lunny side, was a teacher of classical piano. So there was a lot of that kind of music. The sisters learned classical piano. So all I'm saying is there was no traditional, the standard traditional kind of environment for a standout traditional player in Ireland of Dónal's age would have been a family where somebody played, a community where everybody played, and then places that you heard the music. None of that applied to Dónal. So it's all the more extraordinary that he emerges and comes into the music at about age 18 and 19.
He comes into it a bit as an outsider, and maybe that was, in a way, a strength. You talked about the way he played with time signatures, the way other musicians hadn't, because maybe he didn't grow up in that. I found it interesting, and this will be a question I know you've been asked before, but he talks about music in terms of color.
Yes.
And you chose to shoot the film in black and white. And it's beautiful. It's relaxing on the eyes. There's so many shades and tones and variations in well-shot black and white. But what was the derivation of that choice?
That was myself and the cinematographer, Colm Hogan. He said, I think we should shoot this in black and white. And then when he said that, I knew he was right. I never even thought about it. It was like one of those things. Yes, we should.
And why?
I think it was because I thought that with all the archive that I would be bringing in and the kind of natural landscape of Ireland is very subjected to cliched treatment. And so that when people see images of the landscape, and I include Irish people in this as well, they go off into some mythical Irish landscape in their head. And what they're seeing needs to correspond to that. And I didn't want that. I wanted it to be, if you like, just for them to go a little bit further and not to get hooked on the kind of attractive nature of some of the archive we were watching, which was, except for the Planxty gig, in the stadium at the very beginning. Except for that, everything was shot in colour those days. And so you've got all kinds of formats, obsolete tape formats and slightly degenerated film stock and all that. And it just seemed visually that would be very messy to me. And that also people my age, I'm guilty of this myself. I see some footage of musicians from the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. And it's like looking at a lovely family album or something. I go, look at Ronnie Wood's shirt or something. I didn't want any distractions. And I also think that black and white is a beautifully portrait-like medium. It just faces so well so that it would be more like portraiture. I wanted it to be the portrait of an artist. And that's what we were aiming for. And we were filming at the beginning of the year, January, February, March, April. And that the countryside here is pretty bare at that time of the year. And that suited me. And it turned out, because Dónal did get so ill in the middle of it, that it has an Ella J quality to it. Dónal's in his late 70s. He's not going to be around forever. So I wanted it to have that wintry sort of feeling to it.
Yeah, I was struck by your shots of trees, denuded trees, because that's the only time you can really see the architecture of the trees. And it really pops in that black and white and makes a wonderful backdrop. But just switching back a little bit, I was also struck by the length of associations that Dónal's had in the course of his lifetime, the extraordinary relationship, the depth of the relationship he has with Christy Moore. I saw him interviewed in the Late Late Show the other night in the Big Irish Trad session, where he actually pays tribute to you and your work, referring to you as a genius, which I think is
yes,
high praise and well deserved. But he referred to the fact that he'd actually known Christy since primary school.
Yeah.
Would his career have been the same if it wasn't for this hotbed of musicians that all sprang up from this very tight geographic area?
I often wonder about that, because he said to me when he was a teenager, he was into jazz, actually, and he loved Dave Brubeck. And I thought, that, as my daughter would say, that checks, or
that tracks.
That tracks. And I tried to work something in, but we were going down a rabbit hole of what if. I would think that if Dónal had grown up in any other place, in any other time, say a suburb of the city or something, now you'd have to discount other factors. There was a ballad boom, as he said on the Late Late, and he might have been attracted to that. But I think he would have gone the jazz route, which for an Irish musician would have been, I don't know where he would have ended up, because it wasn't a future of any kind in terms of being culturally popular or anything like that. But he would have always been a musician.
Nuala, when you were talking about the time signatures, I was going to say, that reminds me of Dave Brubeck.
Really?
Absolutely.
Yeah. He said the first album he bought was a Dave Brubeck one. And what he was doing, and he said, I would take it home. And his thing was, how is he doing that?
Right.
Now, remember, the other extraordinary thing about Dónal Lunny is he effectively had about 2 piano lessons in his life from a piano teacher in the town who it didn't work out at all, and his mother allowed him to stop the lessons. So you're talking about somebody who was completely and totally self-taught to a degree that most people would not believe. And his ear is phenomenal. And the tune we play at the top of the program, which is not a classical tune at all, La Petite Valse, the piano piece, he remembers that, as in he can play it from hearing it when he was 5 years old. And he doesn't get it himself, of course, because if you're like that, you think, so what? Isn't everybody like that? And he doesn't realise that is pretty phenomenal. It's almost like his actual hard drive memory is music.
Yeah.
He does know that he hears it differently, I think, or that he's come to know that he does.
Hey, it's Martin. We're going to take a break from our conversation with Nuala O'Connor to talk about the Capital Irish Film Festival, which takes place on February 26th to March 1st. Nuala O'Connor will be there in person to talk about her film. I'm delighted to be joined by Maeve McCullough, who's going to give us more details on the festival hosted by Solas Nua in Washington, D.C. I had the pleasure of attending last year. So here's Maeve to tell us more.
Hi, Martin. It's so lovely to be here with you to talk about the 20th edition of Solas Nua's Capital Irish Film Festival. We're very excited about the lineup this year. We have 18 feature films, 7 North American premieres and 7 regional premieres. We've 4 short film programmes for a total of 20 short films, including a family shorts programme, and we're also going to be screening 18 features. We are bringing a lot of new faces and voices to DC this year. We're presenting 12 directorial and feature debuts. We're featuring 11 documentaries in the programme. Music features strongly this year, and we have a number of documentaries profiling and celebrating icons of Irish music, including Nuala's In Time Dónal Lunny. We also have Alan Leonard's B.P. Fallon Rock and Roll Wizard Volume 1, a phenomenal documentary about the legend B.P. Fallon, photographer, musician, publicist, who has been in the music business since the 1960s, where his career started out with the Beatles. And that is a phenomenal film on opening night on Thursday, February 26th. We're also featuring some films that are redefining the Irish folk and trad scene, including Lars Loven's and Dennis Harvey's Celtic Utopia. And Dennis Harvey will be with us on the Saturday night on February 28th in person to do a Q&A with myself. There's also a wonderful documentary by the filmmaker Maeve O'Hare on the influence of the Irish traveller community on traditional music. Travelling Back at Tashtal Shir will also screen at the festival on Saturday the 28th. Staying with documentaries, we've a number of films that depict the fight for justice and the defiant Irish spirit. We have Trisha Zaff's Gerry Adams, A Ballymurphy Man, which is a really intimate first ever portrait of Gerry Adams, one of the most important political leaders of our time who played a really central role in the success of the Irish peace process. We also have Aoife Kelleher's profoundly moving documentary on the chronicle and fight for justice by survivors of Ireland's Magdalen laundries and mother and baby homes. We're screening Gar O'Rourke's Sanatorium, which is Ireland's official entry for the Oscars for 2026. And this is a phenomenal documentary filmed in Ukraine during the first summer of the war at a health spa outside Odessa, where a small group are searching for love and healing and happiness. And Gar will be travelling to DC, and he'll be with us on the Sunday for a conversation with DC Docs founder Skye Sitney. This year's programme is permeated by directorial debuts, and as part of that we're screening Myrid Carton's A Wanton Her, which is an astonishing debut from this Northern Ireland filmmaker. The lineup also includes some of the most critically acclaimed narrative feature films coming out of Ireland. And our opening and closing night films have received the most IFTA nominations this year. That's the Irish Film and Television Academy Awards, the Irish Oscars essentially. We're opening the festival on Thursday the 26th with Lisa Barras de Saz and Glenn Layburn's Saipan, about the famous incident during the World Cup of 2002 between Roy Keane and Mick McCarthy. Our closing night film is a gala screening of Brendan Canty's acclaimed international feature, Christie. It's set in the heart of Knocknaheeny, a working class housing estate in Cork City, and it's such a beautifully crafted coming-of-age story about brotherhood, belonging, and finding your place in the world. It's a powerful debut feature by Brendan Canty, and many people may be familiar with his work through Hosier's Take Me to Church video, but it mines humour and heart, and it's an absolute crowd pleaser. It's a wonderful film to close the festival with. So we'll be at AFI for 4 days from February 26th to March 1st. As well as the 42 films we're presenting across 22 screenings, there will be an opportunity to engage in Irish language with our pop-up Gaeltacht. There'll be gala screenings on Thursday, Friday and Sunday. There'll be post-screening receptions and closing parties. There's a panel discussion on Sunday afternoon after Ruan McGann's Daniel O'Connell, the Emancipator. And that's going to include Shantae Mouton-Quignon from the University of Notre Dame and Jay Roseman from the University of College Cork. in a conversation about Daniel O'Connell and nonviolent mass participation. It's a jam-packed 4 days of film screenings and events, and we're so excited to bring people together at AFI to see the films, but also to gather afterwards and to talk about some of the issues and the topics that are coming up, and to really open up some dialogue, and also to learn more about Ireland and Irish affairs. Ultimately, we're hoping to foster cultural exchange and dialogue together. So looking forward to seeing everybody at AFI February 26th to March 1st. Tickets are on sale now at solasnua.org/SIF.
Maeve McCullough, Director and Curator of the Capital Irish Film Festival. I'm excited to go see some of these films, and even more excited to have the opportunity to connect and reconnect with new and old friends. So make sure you mark your calendar for Capital Irish Film Festival. Spend some time at the beautiful AFI Theatre. It'll be time well spent. Now back to our conversation with Nuala O'Connor. You have a beautiful scene where Donald is visiting a luthier.
Frank Tate. He made a guitar for Paul Simon. That's his only claim to fame outside of Ireland. But he's perfectly suited to Dónal.
And my first exposure to Dónal was a long time ago in the Bothy Band back in the 1970s, and watching him play a bouzouki. And I'm looking at this, and what is that he is playing? Do you find it surprising that Dónal plays traditional music, the form you would think is rigid, but clearly his whole approach to music is innovation at the same time? And how do you think he reconciles those two things? Because I think some people, when they talk about tradition, believe it should remain static, but I think he's obviously very much different.
That's an interesting question. And I actually think that I had some version of this conversation with him before. And I said to him, what was the plan? Like, what were you at? And he said, I wasn't at anything. I just, as he put it, followed the music, is what he said. So he was hearing something, and that was the primary input, what he was hearing. And then he's very playful. So in that adult sense, he wanted to play around with that. He's quite specific about what he likes and what he doesn't like. You do get a sense of that as well, that some things don't fit and some things do. So that's his own inner aesthetic. It will not allow him to do anything beyond what he thinks. So he has his own, if you like, boundaries, very definitely. He's talking about trying to do something with Planxty and that Liam was boxing him in or something, but that he would not go beyond. He wouldn't kick it all over. He would not do that. Now, I know there were instances when he was playing when he was much younger and starting out, and the bouzouki and the guitar were regarded by certain people in the tradition, amongst traditional players, possibly older ones, as just being not acceptable. And there was an occasion, he told me about this himself, that somebody came up to him in one of these traditional clubs in Dublin, which shall be nameless, and asked him to leave and take his guitar, I think it was a guitar he had, and leave. But the musicians he was with, who all went on to become like mainstays of the pure tradition, all said, if he leaves, we leave. So they wanted him. And that's why I have Paddy Glacken in the film, aside altogether from that they are buddies for forever. But I know that Paddy is from that tradition, and that if he can explain it, then that's from inside the tradition. And there's a pure traditional player saying that this makes it better for him, that he loves playing with him. I think that he managed, like Paddy says, he put it, find a way into the music and play in a way that nobody else played, because there was some horrible accompaniment to traditional music. Terrible piano accompaniment, like fourth square, plonky, chord rule, major to minor sort of stuff. Horrible. And drums and Paddy bands, they could be pretty awful as well, some of them. And then the early guitar kind of stuff as well, coming from the ballad thing, that could have been very offensive. So he was never like that. He was never doing that. He was led by the music itself, by finding something in there that, as he said it, needed instrumentation.
No, I want to ask you one more thing. You talked about the portraiture aspect, and you have many passages in the film that are moving portraits, both on two senses of the word moving, emotionally moving, and they're Dónal in motion speaking. You're dealing with him very frequently on highly sensitive topics. What was the level of trust, or what was the environment that was set that enabled him to speak so openly about some extremely difficult passages of life?
Because the death of his son, Shane, if I'm working backwards now, was so public and reported widely, I knew that we could not make a film as if that had never happened. Even though that had such a huge impact, obviously, on Dónal himself. But in a way, it hadn't got anything to do with Dónal as the artist, Dónal. But there was no way we could make the film and not deal with that. So we had a long conversation before we ever started to make the film even. And I said, I think we're just going to have to do all of that. And you are a product of the times in the sense that his personal life has been complex. And he was married very young, which a lot of people of his age were at the time. That the 70s were a very turbulent time in terms of people's personal developments and freedom. It's just when everything was breaking down, even though Dónal was not noisy about any of that. But he seemed to end up in these situations where, despite himself, he ended up in situations where he seemed to be in the front line. So I said, we're just going to have to go there, really. And he was fine about it, because it was an issue of trust. He just trusted me. There was no way I was going to turn the film into that story, because it's not the story I wanted to tell or that he wanted to tell. However, we had to include it. And the other thing is that sometimes the story told itself. He has a relationship with his daughter, Cora Venus Lunny, from his second partner. And having them play together was the story. I set it up very slightly. It came from after his first marriage broke down and he met the second partner and Cora was born, and then we go into Cora playing. So I did it like that. It was very light touch.
Yeah, that was an extraordinary piece of music. I really liked that blend, obviously, between the traditional and Cora Venus playing the more classical approach. To me, that was totally what Dónal Lunny does. He is quite comfortable blending things together, and just a beautiful piece of music. It's worth the price just to watch that piece of video and listen to that piece of music. I just
to be
adored
there
it.
the day. It was absolutely beautiful piece of music. Yeah.
But could you set the scene for that? I alluded to it earlier, that pivotal moment late in the film, the reunion with Christy Moore after Dónal had been ill.
Well,
how did that pull together?
That was amazing how that happened. That was never on the original draft. I decided the best way that I could wrangle all of the material that you could say is Dónal Lunny was to just focus on the relationships that were current at the time that we were filming. Now, I was lucky that two of those relationships, Paddy Glackham, a relationship of 40 plus years or more, and Andy even longer, Andy Irvine. So I had then, and Dónal still played at that stage, was still gigging with them. So I knew I had then ditto Zoe Conway and Martin O'Connor. He was still going out to play with them. And then he has the band Atlantic Arc that he plays with Pauline Scanlon, who's also in the film. So I had these four pillars of what I would call his current artistic life. I did not want to make a retrospective. This is the artist that was Dónal Lunny. I wanted to do, this is the artist. Christy was somebody that he hadn't played with for at least 10 years or more. And so Christy, I didn't include him in it because I couldn't see on the structure how I could. And even though he's in the archive, of course. Anyway, he got sick, he went into hospital, and Christy materialised in the hospital, of course. He went to see Dónal. And then I went in to see Dónal, and Dónal said, I really would like to do something with Christy. And as was that, I did an interview with Christy, and emotionally, I thought, pulled the whole film together, in fact. The relationship is so deep, and Christy can express it. And Olker, he could talk about Dónal and the Lunny family and Newbridge and everything in a way that I think Dónal kind of floated through his childhood in a dream, one of those dreamy kids, whereas Christy didn't. Christy was all around the town. He knew everybody. He knew the Lunnys. He was a sociable kind of boy. And so it filled in that story very well. And then I really didn't know until the day we filmed that, the last performance. I took Dónal out of hospital, drove him to where we shot, and then put him in the car and brought him back to hospital after that. And I honestly didn't know, will he be here? Will he be here when the film comes out? Thank God he is, and it's fine. But I didn't know that then. And the crew that we were working with, they hadn't seen him since March. So they got fright when they saw him in that state. But he's so much better now, as you can see if you saw the Late Late. And we had a screening of the film as part of the Trads Fest 2 nights ago in Dublin. And he came and did the Q&A with me. He's great.
Good to hear.
Yeah, it's great to hear that. Unfortunately, we're getting to that point in this conversation where we have to say goodbye, but we're looking forward to saying hello at the Capital Irish Film Festival, which is taking place at the end of February, start of March. I think it's 26th to March 1st. Just final thoughts on coming to show the film in America, in Washington, D.C. at this point in time.
I am so excited that I haven't been in Washington for a long time. In fact, the last time I was in Washington was in the archives in Washington, doing the research for bringing it all back home, which is about 1990. It's a long time. Now, I've been to the States in the meantime, but not to Washington. I'm very excited to be back. Like, everything is so circular. You end up where you started. And I had such a wonderful time there. And I do remember Mick Maloney was a dear friend of mine in that film, and would be so pleased. I'd have definitely met him on this trip. But anyway, that's a matter of regret that we never got to do the film with Mick. Yeah. We would have liked to have done. Anyway, we will be remembering him.
So with that, I'd like to say thank you for spending some time with us. And we're looking forward to seeing you in DC. As I mentioned, this episode will be coming out in the middle of February, so a prequel to the upcoming celebration. So on behalf of myself and John and our listeners, thanks for giving such great insight into a beautiful work of art. It is a feast for the eye, it is a feast for the ear, and it feeds the soul because it portrays a complex man and the work that he does. So it's great insight into artistry, and I think it'll be an extraordinary legacy going forward. So thank you for that work.
Well, thank you very much. If I have achieved half of that, I'll be pleased.
Hey, John, great to talk to Nuala O'Connor about her wonderful film. It's an extraordinary piece of art, visually, really beautiful film, but also an amazing chronicle of one of the most important figures in Irish music. And I'll be delighted to actually see it on the big screen when we go down to Solas Nua, to the film festival, which is taking place from February 26th to March 1st. Film is only one part of that weekend. There is a whole social vibe that goes on during the festival. That's not to be missed. There's plenty of crack to be had. So looking forward to meeting up with listeners there, especially those that are passionate about Irish film.
Well, I'm looking to take part in the crack this time. Martin, I was unable, as you've mentioned very kindly, not to be there last year. When we're there, we'll be working. In addition to enjoying the crack, we'll be doing some episodes that will be rolling out a bit later. And among the many places you can hear our episodes, besides just about every prominent podcast platform in the known universe, is irishcentral.com. We've had a great partnership with them. They're doing a terrific job helping us get out the stories we tell to their global Irish audience. So irishcentral.com, make sure that's part of your website viewing pleasure.
Irish Stew is produced by John Lee, Martin Nutty, and Bill Schultz. Music on Irish Stew was composed and performed by Rosa Nutty, with Donald Bowens on drums, Cathal O'Riordan on bass and synthesizer. For more on Rosa Nutty's music, please visit rosanutty.com.